Hi, Patrick. Welcome to our podcast on eclipses in history. So, today we're going to talk about an important slave revolution about Nat Turner. You're going to be the expert for the day.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I'll short. I'll read a short biography for Patrick Breen. So he's an associate professor at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island, where he teaches history classes in America and African American history. He also teaches in the college's interdisciplinary development of Western civilization program. He has written on slavery and slave resistance, most notably The Land Shall Be Diluted in Blood, a New History of the Nat Turner Revolt, which was published by Oxford. He's now at work on a project on Alexis de Tocqueville's 1831 travels through America. Okay, so Patrick, you have a book, you have an interesting book. Can you show our viewers your book and tell a little bit about it?
This is my book, The Land Shall Be Deluged in Blood, A New History of the Nat Turner Revolt. Thank you for your kind introduction of it. It's the story of a revolt that took place in Southampton County, Virginia in 1831. Nat Turner was a slave leader. He was a preacher, and he ended up leading one of the most important revolts in American history. In August of 1831, he and about
I asked you about if your book contains something about the eclipse that Nat Turner interpreted as a sign from from heavens for the
yes,
revolution to happen.
yes, right. So Nat Turner was a slave preacher, and had he was he was captured after the revolt, and so he gave his account of the revolt to his white captors after the revolt. In that confession that he had, which was widely published and spread, he talked about how he had been religiously minded and very religious as a youth. And one of the things he did was he learned to interpret natural phenomena as having religious meaning. And so when the eclipse happened, he saw that as a sign that his is that he should engage in the revolt. So this was one of the triggers of the revolt when this eclipse happened in Southampton County, Virginia in 1831.
Excellent. Now we're going to start with the questions that we prepared. And the first would be history says that Nat Turner learned to read and write when he was a young boy. Did he learn it himself or did he have someone who taught him? Do you think this education played a key role in his leadership?
Yeah, he knew how to read and write. This was one of the things that investigators came and wanted to find out, when they're trying to figure out what led Nat Turner to lead this deadly slave revolt. Um, the how he In the story of the Confessions, he tells that it was a miracle that he learned how to read and write. The
Mhm.
man taking his confessions down, a guy by the name of Thomas Gray, didn't believe him and thought that he was taught by his parents. We actually don't have any more information than that. We know that he knew how to read and write, that they found out that he could read and write, but it was unclear who taught him how to read and write.
Is it possible that it could have been masters'
Yeah.
children or something?
Absolutely. There's lots of stories about different people learning different ways to read and write. One of the most famous is Frederick Douglass's story of learning how to read and write. Frederick Douglass in his narrative. Now, Frederick Douglass is a little younger than Nat Turner and in Maryland, which is
Mhm.
not so far from Virginia. He tells about how he was initially taught to read and write by his mistress, but her husband stopped him from learning how, teaching Frederick Douglass to read and write. But at that point, Frederick Douglass decided he would take it on himself, and he learned in part from other white children who were going to school.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now let's go to our second question, which is, tell us more about Nat Turner's parents and how they became the property of Masters Benjamin and Elizabeth, Nat Turner's first masters.
We don't know much about them. We do know uh, that they were born in Virginia. So it's a couple generations from. He's a couple generations from the since his family came from Africa.
Mhm.
So he doesn't have that immediate direct connection with Africa, which isn't surprising. The slave trade closes in 1807, 1808 in the United States, but actually Virginia was not importing slaves. Really, after the revolution, by the time the revolution happens, it has declined as a slave importer. Most of the slaves who are coming to America are coming to South Carolina by that point. So his family had been in Virginia a relatively long time, and Southampton, it's not, it's in the Tidewater. It's a part of Virginia that's fairly well established. So there was not a strong African connection in Nat Turner's family.
So Southampton is a city in
It's a
Virginia?
It's not a city, it's a county. It's right on the
Mhm.
North Carolina border, so it's a rural setting. The
Mhm.
town that's the seat of Southampton County is a town called Jerusalem, and it is a place where Nat Turner was trying to capture, and it was a place that he was eventually taken when he was arrested and tried and executed. That's now called Cortland, Virginia on the maps. It's not called Jerusalem anymore. So if you're looking on Google, you have to look up Cortland, but it was called Jerusalem at the time, which sort of fits in with Nat Turner's the way he saw this as a religious war.
And it was said that Nat Turner had markings in his body, and his parents said that these markings would mean that he would become someone important to his people, that he could become a leader or something. So can you tell a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's unclear what the markings were, but the way he was someone who learning how to read, having these markings, he had a certain status in the Black community. He was someone who Nat Turner was special. And, so when he came out with the idea to rebel, people were not so surprised, I think, because he was always a little different. He was on a different wavelength and had a different amount of power and prestige than others.
Mhm. And I was reading that when he was a child, he remember no he didn't remember, but he knew facts from the year of his birth, and so some people thought that he was a prophet, a prophet.
Yeah, his family told him that he knew stuff from before he was born, and this is again more signs that he was sort of anointed by God to be a prophet, and so this was something that his family certainly believed and taught him, and so he wasn't surprised that he had a special mission, which
Hmm.
ultimately was to lead the slave rebellion.
All right, so let's go to the other question, which is, please tell our viewers about Nat Turner's interest in becoming a preacher to his people and his Christian life.
Nat Turner was a very serious religious figure. And one of the most interesting things about him was religion was prior to slave resistance for him. When he escaped, he had run away from a master earlier. When he escaped, uh, he was out in the county and praying. And he says the Holy Spirit told him to go back uh, to slavery. So, he's someone who's very very committed to his religious principles, and he sees this without question as a religious war, one that God had asked him to do. Whites were curious after the revolt. They said, Nat Turner, obviously this isn't what God wanted. And Nat Turner said, how do you know that? Just because it failed? You know, Jesus died too. And they were very taken aback by that comparison. But there's nothing in the revolt or in the aftermath of the revolt that made him pull back from the idea that this was what God wanted and intended to him.
And about this connection with the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit told Nat Turner that he should go back to slavery, but his fellow slaves said to him that if they were smart as Nat Turner, they would never serve any master. And so Nat Turner decided. So it was said that it was not, it was less a God order, but it was more than a Nat Turner decision to do the revolution.
Yeah, no, the one of the things that happened, and this is sort of an interesting part of the story of Nat Turner, is while he was so committed to religion and so committed to his following his understanding of what he was supposed to do, and we see that with the Holy Spirit, other slaves were like not convinced that Nat Turner was right. They're like, that's not what the Holy Spirit wants. I argue that he's a little bit off pace with everyone else. People are sitting there saying he's a little bit different, and the larger slave community is not interested in hearing a religion that is going to ask them to obey their masters. There many of the white religious figures in Southampton and throughout the South are preaching exactly that to the slaves, that you're supposed to obey your masters. And the slaves are like, that's a joke. And you see that really well. And it's like Harriet Jacobs' account of religion in North Carolina. And Harriet Jacobs is actually a contemporary of Nat Turner. Harriet Jacobs were one of the most famous narratives of slavery written by a woman. And she's only about 30 or 40 miles from Nat Turner writing at the time of Nat Turner's. She's not writing at the time, she's living at the time of Nat Turner's rebellion. And so she reflects on it in her narrative 30 years later.
Yes, that's very interesting. Now let's move to our next question, which is the sermons in the farms at the time warned slaves against escaping and that they should obey their masters no matter what. Please tell us what young Nat's response was to these instructions. Had Nat Turner of other slaves revolts have Nat Turner heard of other slave revolts that might have inspired him?
Great question. So first, when Nat Turner, as I said, religion was really important to him, and he took these things seriously. So he was actually, when he goes and escapes slavery, which we sort of certainly sympathize with today, when he escapes slavery, Nat he went out and prayed, and the Holy Spirit told him come back, and so he came back. And the others are like, that is complete nonsense. Nat Turner was willing to take seriously the biblical, and there's a lot in the Bible about slaves obeying your masters, and so he was grappling with the sort of religious justifications, the Christian justifications for slavery. He was taking them much more seriously. Harriet Jacobs describes how the larger Black community, which was in his neighborhood, responded, and basically the response was they laughed at it. I mean, when the masters had preachers come in and say, "Slaves obey your masters," they're like, "What a joke." This is nonsense. Nat Turner had heard of other slave revolts. He doesn't say which slave revolt he had heard of. It's probably Gabriel's slave rebellion that happened. It's a slave conspiracy that happens in Richmond in 1800, but it also may have been the Haitian Revolution. These are important slave revolts, and he uses them to think about how he should strategize. He thinks that the problem with American slave revolts is that American slave revolts are too often betrayed by some Blacks who are in the revolts. And so he made the decision, and tactically, basically a wise decision, I think, not to make the revolt, not to spread the conspiracy super wide before it began, because if you did, word would leak and the whites would find out, and the conspiracy would be crushed, which is what happened to Gabriel's revolt.
Interesting. So let's move to our next question, which is uh, many of our viewers are interested in eclipses. Please share with us any information you have about the eclipse of the sun that was interpreted by Nat Turner as a sign from heaven for the insurrection. Was it a total eclipse? Did a large area of America see it?
Yeah, it was. Southampton is apparently in the total eclipse line, so it seems that he did experience a total eclipse.
Mhm.
The eclipse line goes from basically Louisiana up to Virginia, so it was experienced by a wide swath of Americans, and these are really remarkable experiences. We just had a total eclipse here. In New England last year, and people went to go see it, and it's a really remarkable experience. So Nat Turner's eclipse was a well remarked on event, and it's astounding. I mean, people are like, this is
Mhm.
this is eerie, this is wild. So it was, so now obviously the different parts of America, I can't say where was cloudy and where was not, but clearly it was seen by Nat Turner and the people around him. In fact, the people around him said, weren't surprised when Nat Turner said, "Guess what? This is time to start the rebellion." They knew that he was looking for religious signs, and this was it. This was going to be a perfect sign that they should start their revolt.
And we're seeing this series eclipses in history that many historical facts are connected to solar and lunar eclipses. And this is maybe one of the most interesting examples because would you imagine a so big insurrection influenced by a solar eclipse?
That's right. That's right. I mean, he
Impressive.
certainly, yeah, he had the plans. The plans were already there, and he was wondering, should he begin? He was having second doubts, and the eclipse clarified. And he's like, no, God clearly wants us to do this. This is a sign from God. So it did really loose the revolt that was sort of waiting in limbo, waiting for a sign, frankly. And this
Mhm.
was the sign that Nat Turner was waiting for.
Yes, perfect. Now let's move. The next question is how did Nat Turner plan the insurrection? Did he meet with other slaves? How did he communicate with other slaves who led the insurrection? Because I imagine there should have been some smaller leaders, right?
Yeah, so he actually kept it very small. Initially, he had four people in on the plot. This is in February of
Mhm.
1831. And in fact, when they meet for a dinner in uh, August of 1831, right before the revolt was about to begin, he's surprised when the people he had brought into the revolt had brought a couple more people in. He didn't realize that it was now up to six, but it was super, super small. And he says that the decision to keep it small was an intentional decision that they made based on the theory that slave revolts were often discovered when the news of the revolt or the word of the revolt was too widely shared, and the whites would eventually find out about it.
So some slaves would tell their masters about the revolt. That's why
Other revolts, not Nat Turner. Nat Turner was a complete surprise to the white community. The other revolts were betrayed by slaves. Gabriel's revolt in Richmond, actually, that's an interesting one because they were about to get underway, and it was a much bigger revolt than Nat Turner's revolt. But what the historical sources call a freshet, or a storm. We think maybe a hurricane remnant had washed out the bridge that they were going to go across. And so that delayed their start, at which point some of the people who had heard of the revolt shared with their masters that, you probably don't want to be in Richmond now because something bad's going to happen. And that got the curiosity of the whites up, and the whites discovered that this revolt was underway. Nat Turner didn't want that to happen to his revolt.
But I read that, for example, the Turner's people, they went to a farm,
Mhm.
and the slaves, they knew about the revolt, but they didn't want to collaborate, and they protected their masters, and they expelled the Nat Turner's people.
Yeah, no, there's clearly a lot going on by the end of the revolt. So this is one of the things. The advantage of not having a big, widespread
Hmm.
insurrection plan is that the whites aren't going to find out about it. The disadvantage is the blacks aren't going to find out about it either. So they have to make a decision right on the spot. Are you going to join a revolt? And most revolts, remember, most slave revolts fail. I mean, Haiti's the one exception that we look at. Most slave revolts fail, and they're put down really brutally. So the question isn't, do you prefer slavery or freedom? It's, are you going to go join these guys and possibly die in the next 3 days? Or are you going to try to lay low and not be committed? Or, and some people do this, are you going to support the or the whites and try to establish your loyalty, your ability to sort of negotiate, not getting punished after when the whites come back and just punish the black community brutally. That's a tough decision. And so blacks will, I mean, I think the vast majority of blacks are going to lay low. Some are going to, like, as soon as they hear of this revolt, they're going to go join it. But there's also the third group who's like, no, we're not going to do this. Or, we're going to protect our masters. Maybe we don't like slavery, but we don't want this kid getting killed. And
Hmm.
that's going to happen too. There's a famous instance where there's a woman running away, taking her charge, a young child, into the woods to go hide. And this is the kind of thing that happens. People are going to make lots of decisions, but the thing about Nat Turner's revolt is that they're sort of really quick decisions.
And do you think that Nat Turner knew that he imagined that he would be captured because I read that Nat Turner said that he would not resist that if the man who captured him didn't kill him, he will not resist. And at some point he said he regretted the revolution. So do you think he imagined he would be captured?
Yeah, no, at the end, right after that 2 months that he had been away, he had been in the wilderness, and he realized the game was up, and he wasn't gonna, he was armed with a sword, he had nothing, as there were whites all around. He realized that there was no point of resistance. I don't think the point of resistance was he thought that the revolt was a mistake. He never says that. In fact, he doesn't apologize for the revolt in the trial records or the confessions. He thinks that the revolt was right. He just doesn't think that God's plan was that the revolt was going to work. He had a different plan. And at that plan, he thought, was Nat Turner was going to share his witness in his confessions. And that became what he wanted to do. He wanted to save and tell his story. Now he understood he was going to die. That he wasn't deluded. He didn't think something magical was going to happen. He understood he was going to die. The whites were going to kill him, but he wanted to tell his story before he died.
Hmm. Perfect. Now let's continue. Um, Let me see. Where did the insurrection take place, and how many slaves do you estimate were involved?
So the insurrection took place in Southampton County, Virginia, which is on the southern border of Virginia, about halfway between Richmond and Newport News. It's a rural county. Um, because he had not established a deep, a deep, deep, had to spread the word of the revolt widely in the community. It was a small revolt. It started out, but the day of the revolt was about 6 or 8 people when the revolt began. Over the course of the 2 days that the revolt happened, they probably had about 5 dozen people involved in the revolt. Um, Again, there were lots of people got involved in many ways. The whole county was turned upside down by the revolt. But the people who were sort of traveling with Nat Turner were about 5 dozen.
5,000 people.
5 dozen, 60, not 5 dozen. Not a big revolt.
So it was not a big number.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, Nat Turner's revolt is famous not because it was a big revolt. I mean, there's many, many bigger revolts throughout the Caribbean. You see in Brazil, there's many, many bigger revolts. The thing is, it's deadly because he keeps it small, because it's a surprise. It's the deadliest revolt in American history. So a lot of whites are killed in the revolt, but it wasn't a large revolt in terms of the number of people involved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Now let's continue. Uh, your your book talks of a slave called Moses who knew everything about the insurrection. What role did Moses play in the Nat Turner's insurrection?
Moses was a child who the slave rebels impressed. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
people, among the people who traveled with the revolts, there were different sort of groups. There were some people who were super eager. The classic example of this is Will, who becomes the executioner, the person who does most of the killings that we know about, that we can identify the killer of. He's super eager and enthusiastic to be involved in the revolt. Um, Others are sort of hanging in the back. They're like going along, but they want to say that they were coerced. Moses is a child who's brought along basically to hold their horses as they go. They're traveling by horseback, and when they get off and they attack a farm, he's the one who's going to hold their horses. And he's young; he's about 14 years old. So whites afterwards use him as sort of the key witness who has seen everything that's happened. And so he will be used to discuss other slave rebels at their trials. Like other slaves are going to be captured. This is in that time. The trials happen really quickly after the revolt, like a week or more after they start up. And Moses becomes sort of the best witness of what actually happens on the ground because he's traveling with them the whole time. And so he can talk about the different dispositions of the different slaves. And so he becomes a key witness. He's actually convicted of going with the rebels, but either because he's young or because he's been a cooperative witness or something else, they commute the sentence, which was a death sentence. That's the sort of automatic penalty for a slave revolt, to being transported out of the state. So he's being transported out of the state. He's in Richmond at the time that Nat Turner was caught. So he's not actually a witness he's not actually a witness at Nat Turner's own trial.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now let's go to our next question, which is uh, your book also says that Nat Turner's final hiding place was a pine tree and that he was very smart at finding good hiding places. Please describe how Phipps captured Nat Turner and sent him to judges.
Yeah, Nat Turner. I mean, one of the questions is Nat Turner. People think about Nat Turner and they're like, he hears voices, he interprets natural phenomena like eclipses and words from God. Is he just crazy? And it doesn't seem like it. He's able to make smart decisions. The decision to keep the revolt small is tactically wise. And we see this again after the revolt, where he's able to hide, even though the entire county is looking for him. He picks spots. One of the things he realizes is if he's going to hide for a long time, he needs access to water. So he finds spots that are going to have access to easy water where he's not going to be exposed and visible to other people. So he's able to hide for a long time. And I think that this reveals that, he's a smart guy. He's not a dope. He's not crazy. He's a smart guy who can still think about, about how to make things work. He's not just looking for God to magically make it happen. He's thinking through the process. And, if you're talking about being able to hide from a whole county of people who are looking for you, he succeeds.
And in the beginning, I read that in the beginning he was being careful about the hiding, but after he was taking more risks, and that he would go away in the night, and that he would go and come back during the night. I don't know, if grab food or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Now this is some place that his confessions are a little bit vague, and my suspicion of what's going on is that Nat Turner's actually getting support from the Black community, that he's going out and maybe talking to some people he knows are going to be sympathetic to him and getting food. He might just be stealing food from other people. He doesn't say, but it makes sense that he wouldn't tell the whites who are going to kill him. Oh, and by the way, these are the people who helped me. So he might be keeping that. He might be keeping that secret. But he did understand that. I mean, as the revolt, as time went away, as time passed, and it got farther from the revolt, he had to be. He was sitting there and thinking about. He was taking more risks. Immediately after the revolt, I think he laid very low, and then as time passed, he would go out more and more, and eventually it was going out that led and getting, I think, a ham or something like that, which is what got the attention of the dogs, who eventually found his first hiding place. It would be a couple more weeks till he was captured, but it was he was he was uh, I don't know what I was saying. Clip that, yeah.
Yes, and he
Um,
took some risks, but
he
he
took
knew
he
what
was taking more risks at the end. Yeah, he was taking more
yes.
risks, and he didn't have, while he was good at actually the hiding, he didn't have a good plan to escape. Like
Hmm.
the only way, and it's actually possible because there's no way if he gets 300 miles away, you know, do people know that he's Nat Turner? No, they don't. Now, people are finding a lot of Nat Turners. There are people in other spots in Virginia and Maryland and Ohio where people are saying, hey, here's a black guy walking around. He must be Nat Turner. And that's not Nat Turner. Nat Turner was in Southampton County. So it's not necessary. But if you get 6 months away, if you get on a slave ship, you get on a whaling ship or something like that, and you get away, um, he actually could have gotten away possibly, but he couldn't get to that. So he couldn't get to that spot. The other thing is, while there's a lot of support for runaway slaves in the Black community, um, supporting Nat Turner is dangerous. In ways that supporting a runaway might not be, and so it's less clear that he's going to get the support. But he's got no clue on how to ultimately escape um, escape Southampton County, which he's going to have to do if he's not going to get killed.
So he knew that it would be just a matter of time for the whites to capture him.
I think so. I think he didn't. I mean, I think he was trying to figure out a way not to, but I don't think he came up with one.
Yes.
He's still in the exact neighborhood where the revolt took place. He hadn't gotten anywhere.
Hmm. Okay, perfect. Now let's move. I also read that Nat Turner master had been kind to him, but he and his wife were still brutally killed by Nat Turner. Please comment on this.
Yeah, this is something that really gets us, and it makes us think, well, are the confessions reliable? The confessions are the account of Nat Turner's revolt that is purportedly from Nat Turner, but written down by Thomas Gray. Uh, my first theory when I was going to write this book is I was going to write this book without the confessions of Nat Turner. But as I examined them, I came more and more to believe that the confessions of Nat Turner are, in fact, what they claim to be, which is what other people say at the time, which is the confessions of Nat Turner. There's a real difference in voices between Thomas R. Gray, who writes stuff about it, and the
Mhm.
voice of Nat Turner in the revolt. They've even got different perspectives. So I think that in the end, it makes most sense to think of Nat Turner as the person speaking in the main part of the revolt, even if it's not an exact transcription. That makes the comment that Nat Turner said his master was kind more problematic. Like, if Nat Turner really said this, what's he thinking? I mean, it's easy to dismiss this as something written by whites who wanted to say, wanted to make this person who had now died sound better. But it seems to me that it's actually Nat Turner saying he's a kind master. Now, when you say someone's a kind master, you're speaking relatively, doesn't, this is not someone who is sadistic and tortures his slaves. That's, does this person feed the slaves? Does this person ask a reasonable amount of work from the slaves? That's a kind master. It's, it's, and so Nat Turner said he had a kind master, which is one of the things that it was not just a response to sort of some mistreatment set him off and he's going to start a revolt. He actually is fighting against the system of slavery. He actually thinks that slavery is a bad system. So it's a war against slavery. He thinks God thinks slavery is bad, and he thinks that even kind masters are guilty.
Mm-hmm. And the question that came before that I was escaping, I didn't see the question, is I read that the insurrection was very cruel. Men, women, children, and babies were brutally killed. Even women, some women were raped. Please comment on this.
Well, first, there's no evidence that any women were raped. In fact, there are people commenting that at the time, it seems like the slave rebels really weren't sexually assaulting women, which was something that the whites were looking for. This becomes a really important trope in American history because the idea that blacks are lascivious and they're going to be attacking white women is going to be a common thread in American history, but it's really not there in 1831. There are people looking for it. Did it happen? No. The comments are, we see no evidence of this. So if the whites said that there's no evidence of it, I sort of take them at the word. If there had been evidence of this, it would have been. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the indiscriminate death. One of the tactics that the slave rebels came up with is that they realized that as the rebellion was starting, they had to assemble a force before they got discovered, right? 8 guys walking around with a couple guns is not really a dangerous group. And so what they decided was before they'd gotten together something that would appear like an army, they had to kill everyone, men, women, and children. And that actually makes sense, right? An 8-year-old goes running away from a slave revolt, and they're like, "Oh, we don't kill the 8-year-old." Well, that person's going to take news of the slave revolt to the next plantation. That'll allow the whites to find out. So they decided to kill all men, women, and children. Now, this becomes an interesting thing that happens because at one of the plantations they visit, there's an infant. Now, an infant can't go and tell people about the revolt. Yeah, you could find an infant a day or two later. There's the infant in his crib. He's hungry, he's crying, but he's fine. What were they going to do? The slaves were, it seems like the slaves involved in the slave revolt were split on that question. Some of them wanted to kill everyone. Nits make lice, they said. Well, maybe that child is not a slaveholder, but that child's going to become a slaveholder. So some people wanted to do it. On the other hand, other people are like, no, why we're killing everyone is sort of more tactical. And so we don't need to kill the infant. So at this one house, they killed everyone in the house. They did not kill the infant. As they were leaving the house, they walk away and someone's like, hold on, we didn't kill the infant. And so 2 guys get sent back to kill the infant. So they made the decision to kill everyone. This principle of killing everyone became part of the slave revolt, and that was absolutely part of the slave revolt as long as it happened. In fact, the most deadly site of the slave revolt was a school. They came across a small school, and most of the people killed at the school were going to be women and children, and so the revolt was a revolt that really didn't target women and children, but because they were attacking plantations, it turned out that mostly women and children were the ones who were in their path.
So maybe we could say that it's a result of what they have received from the whites in terms of brutal treatment and some other cruelty that the whites did for him. It's not a justification that what they did was right, but what the white people did for them was not right also.
No, I mean, clearly, the idea, the people who are thinking about it tactically are fighting slavery, but there are people who are most connected to it, and this is a moment to release the rage of a lifetime of oppression. And, there are those who are going to fight back and are really going to sort of take glee in the chance to avenge what they and their entire family, their community had suffered. And so that will be a part of the revolt.
Exactly. Now let's proceed. I read that Nat Turner heard. No, no, we have talked about this. I think we can skip this
Yeah,
question, right?
right.
Uh, I read that when children, when they were children, slaves and whites, children played together. But as they grew older, they went separate ways. White children went to schools and academies, and slave children went to the fields to work. Please tell us how this different reality might have influenced Nat Turner to want to revolt. Could this have been a cause of the revolt, or at least part of it? That the children went separate ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is something that's often common, and Nat Turner doesn't make as much of this as some other slave narratives do, but this is an important moment where before white kids go to school, there's not a real strong sense of slavery in the black children when they're 4 and 5. They don't really think about them being slaves. They often are playmates with whites. Once the whites go to school, that's the moment where African Americans start to realize, hold on, there's two systems at place here. There's sort of an unjust world because there's the white world and the black world, and the whites are going to have privilege and the blacks are not. And that's certainly something that a lot of slave narratives really, really point to as a central moment. Now, one of the things is you got to remember, while Nat Turner has sort of this religious background that we're thinking about, the people who support him don't necessarily. And so many of them are going to be focused on the same things that, are going to be thinking about attacking slavery in terms, maybe not unlike this. Maybe one of them was someone whose master had sort of become uppity after they had gone to school, and they had separated themselves from the black community. This was a moment of real, real pain in many African American narratives. The people that sometimes they felt close to the whites, and then they realized that that's broken. Society was not going to let that friendship endure, certainly not in that way that they had when they were 4, 5, or 6.
I see. Yes, that's true. Now let's continue. So, $1,000 for Nat Turner's capture. Were many people trying to capture Nat Turner?
Yeah, Nat Turner was, I mean, Nat Turner was national news, right? The United States all heard of this revolt. It took 2 months to capture him. So people are like, what in the world happened? That people were surprised. The rebellion was put down quickly. Most of the slaves involved in the rebellion were captured quickly. The trials happened quickly. They started just over a week after the rebellion. So, and then the executions happened quickly. This all, right? Moses is the star witness in the trials that I talked about before. He's sent to Richmond because it's all over. It's all over, but Nat Turner still lost. So people across the country are thinking about it, but certainly in Southampton County, people are trying to are asking what happened to Nat Turner? Where did he go? How did we not find him? A lot of people thought he left Southampton County. That turned to be wrong, but nonetheless, people were looking for him. Now, in Southampton County, I think that the seeking him had really gone down. August, everyone's out trying to put down the rebellion. Early September, people are looking. By October, they're looking less. And Nat Turner had a sense that fewer people were out there looking for him until the two black men found his hideaway and then told whites that there was a black man or Nat Turner in the woods. At which point, everyone in Southampton County was out looking for him, in part because there was that big reward. But of course, they also wanted to capture and punish Nat Turner, who they really hated. We're sitting there thinking about the things that, the ways that this was right. The white community just saw this as absolutely wrong. There were a few people who may have reflected on it more dispassionately and said, well, maybe this is part of the system of slavery, but there was a lot of people who were just angry and vindictive and wanted to capture and punish Nat Turner.
I read that when they captured Nat Turner, at first some whites had beaten him, and because they were happy to have gotten the person who caused so many deaths, and they wanted to punish him somehow before he was judged before. But when he went to be judged, he had a different treatment, so people did not beat him. They protected Nat Turner until he was judged and had his sentence.
Right. There's going to be a popular sentiment against Nat Turner, and if he gets killed or if he gets tortured and abused outside of the court, no one who does it is going to be punished. And the people in Southampton, the leaders of Southampton County, recognize this. And so one of the things they did was they protected Nat Turner so that he could be tried. They wanted to kill him, they wanted to execute it, but they wanted to take him through the process. And so the big danger for them was not that Nat Turner would escape or that there'd be a new rising. I don't think there probably was fear of that, but there wasn't a lot of rational fear of that. The big fear was that the whites would come in and take him and punish him in a way that was sort of incompatible with the law and certainly crueler and meaner than the law, which prescribed hanging him.
Yes. All right, Patrick. Now let's continue. Please tell us about Nat Turner's confessions. You talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. They're a great document. I mean, they're really one of the most important and perplexing documents in American history. I mean, I do, you've got Frederick Douglass's narrative, you got Harriet Jacobs, but I really think that this is a fascinating document where you sit there and you think about, the most famous slave rebel actually giving us some of his perspective in ways that make it sort of hard, like when we talked about the kind master, if we think about that as being his words. I mean, there are the problems of interpretation. Maybe Thomas R. Gray is not faithfully taking down what Nat Turner's saying. That doesn't seem to be the case. And in fact, most of the scholars who are working with the Confessions of Nat Turner really think that this is not just a made-up document, but it's a basically reliable historical source to get Nat Turner's view. It's a really complex and interesting document and readily available. It's not very long. If there's teachers out there who listen to this podcast, you can assign them in class. They're definitely short and readable.
Do you know how many pages does it have?
It's, I'm trying to think of the number of pages it had. It was either 16 or 32 when it was published. But in a short copy of it, is going to come out in 20 or 30 pages of modern typeset, typically. So it's definitely a short, readable document.
But it's lots of content, right?
There's lots of, sorry. Oh,
Lots
lots
of
of content.
content.
Oh, absolutely. It's our best source on the slave revolt. I mean, to actually have the leader of the slave revolt's account of what happened is remarkable. It's a really amazing document.
All right, now let's continue. Um, so, Nat Turner was judged, condemned, and decapitated. Please tell us his legacy and the lessons we learned from his insurrection.
He was judged, condemned, and executed. He wasn't decapitated. He was hanged. He was hanged,
And
hanged from a tree. Yep. So his legacy is he is the most important and the most famous slave rebel. When we're in the United States, when we're thinking about the examples of responses that Black Americans took to the system of slavery, there's different ways you can respond, and Nat Turner becomes sort of the exemplar of resistance. The idea that no, we're not going to accept slavery. We're going to fight against slavery. Now, most slaves didn't do what Nat Turner did, which was fight against slavery literally and die in the process. But there were lots of people who resisted in smaller ways. And so this becomes a really important idea, I think a central idea to modern historiography. When we think about African Americans and how they thought about slavery, the main thread that's going through this is to explore the ways of resistance. And in fact, when you go and look at the rise of modern historiography, Nat Turner is sort of the centerpiece of the change in slave studies. In the 1950s and 60s, we start thinking about slaves and slave agency in a different way, history from the bottom up. That's going to emerge in the 50s and 60s, also with the civil rights movement. But the account of Nat Turner, the first account of Nat Turner that's not written from a white perspective, but written from a sympathetic perspective, is going to be Herbert Aptheker's History of American Slave Revolts, which is written in 1941, I think. So when we're thinking about this is going to be a seminal event in the history and an important event for us to think about when we're thinking about how we understand slavery.
yes, Patrick, excellent. Now let's continue. Um, let's see. What is the meaning of Nat Turner insurrection for Black people and for American society as a whole, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, Nat Turner's he's contested. Lots of people are going to say different things about him. But one of the things we know is from the very beginning, African Americans, this is in the 19th century, were thinking about Nat Turner. He's an important figure for them. And the reason for this, I think, is pretty clear. There's a sense that in some ways, African Americans struggle, have this had this problem, which is like, did we put up with slavery too much? Should we have fought more? And Nat Turner becomes an example of someone who's like, no, this is part of the African American tradition. There are these guys who are going to stand up to slavery and fight against slavery. And so Nat Turner does that. And so he's going to be a very important figure. Now, the most famous work on Nat Turner is going to be William Styron's Nat Turner, which takes it in a totally different direction. But for the Black, and that's going to, in fact, William Styron's Confessions of Nat Turner, a novel that won the Pulitzer Prize back in 1967, is going to elicit responses because that Nat Turner seems less like the resistance of Nat Turner. In fact, there's a book that's going to be written, 10 Black Writers Respond to William Styron's Confessions, in part because Nat Turner is such an important cornerstone for African American identity in the United States.
All right, excellent. Now, Patrick, let's move forward. So the next question is Nat Turner. So now we have already seen this question. So let's move to the last question. Was Nat Turner insurrection doomed to fail from the start, or could it have succeeded? Or do you see Nat Turner's insurrection as a success? What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, was Nat Turner's revolt going to take down the United States? No, it wasn't. I mean, demographically, the success of the Haitian Revolution and Southampton makes clear there's a completely different situation. And even the Haitian Revolution, which has 90% Africans and African Americans and Haitian Americans and Africans in Haiti. Even a place like that, that was a long process that went through many fits and starts before Haitian independence. That's going to be different than what happens in Southampton. So if you're saying the measure of success of a slave rebellion is that it takes an unjust system and destroys it and imparts a new system, Nat Turner's revolt's not going to succeed. But Nat Turner doesn't think that his revolt is set up that way. Nat Turner thinks that his revolt is something that God ordained. And so he sees a way that even in losing, he can still be doing God's will, even in setting an example of African American resistance, he can be doing God's will, even in extracting a small moment of revenge for what was centuries of torture, he could be winning. So if you use the definition, if you're looking at the scoreboard at the end of the game and you're saying, hey, is there any way that Nat Turner succeeds? There's really not. This is not, I mean, they're trying to do different things, and negotiations are possible. It seems much more likely that Vesey's rebellion in Charleston has a chance, to go get slave ships and go to Haiti. That seems plausible in a way that Nat Turner is sort of less plausible. But that assumes that what he was trying to do was win, rather than just telling us and telling the people at the time to remember that slavery is wrong, and a terrible, terrible wrong.
All right, Patrick. So we got to the end of our interview. So
Great.
I'd like to thank you for being here today, and thank you for the incredible knowledge that you shared
My
with me,
pleasure.
with us today. It was incredible. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. This was a pleasure, and good luck with your project. I hope it's a great one.
And David will do a closing now. So I call my partner David to do a closing to this interview.
Okay, well, I think all of us were fascinated by this interview. May I ask each of you a quick question first about this before we close? Patrick, did Nat Turner's revolt survive in the popular memory throughout the 19th century, or was it suppressed and only rediscovered or known by academics? In other words, did the average person know and remember this?
No, the average white person. Well, okay, so I'm going to have to do different scales. In Southampton, it's remembered in the white and black community. Okay, both have it. They have an oral tradition that keeps it alive. In the historians, the white historiographical tradition goes back to 1900 Southampton insurrection. So this is something that historians know about. The average white on the street probably doesn't know about it without a special connection. The black community has a much, much deeper connection. In Virginia, it's well known. In abolitionist circles, it's well known. It's remembered. There's a Higginson. Thomas Wentworth Higginson publishes an article in the Atlantic Monthly, which is an abolitionist magazine, in 1860, 1861, on the slave revolts. So this is something that educated blacks know about throughout the country, and the radicals know about. But I don't think like a person in high school would get this. A person, even a college educated person, would know about this. Only people who are in those sort of political circles would know about it.
I see. And Norma, I have a a question for you too before we close. Are there parallels in Brazilian history? Slavery lasted much longer in Brazil than in the United States. Were there massive results? Are there famous revolt leaders known? And do you learn about things like that in school? Did it happen?
There was one, let me try to remember the name. There is a revolt, but I can't remember the name now.
There was one in Baja in I
Zumbi, Quilombo dos Palmares.
yeah, no, those are one of the things that happens in Brazil is that there's going to be the movement of ways to communities that are going to be able to be established sort of separate from the colonial state. And that's going to be something. Now, that's not going to happen in America, at least America in the 19th century. That is going to happen in places like Jamaica. It's going to happen in places like Suriname. These places are going to have African American communities that are going to be able to be separate from the larger.
You mean they
society.
revolt and move inland away from context?
Exactly. But one of the deals that happens regularly with these African communities that revolt and pull away is that the deal is the whites let them exist because the whites don't have the ability to stop them. But the negotiated deal is they can't support new runaways coming into their communities. So what they'll do is they'll then new people come, they'll send them back into slavery. And then so it's again one of those awkward things that happens. It's an awkward settlement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both. This was a fascinating interview today. We learned a lot about history, but also a lot about things that are directly relevant to our life today, because many of the issues discussed here persist in our society, and as we can see by the last bit of discussion, extend to other societies in the Americas where slaves were brought with differing results in different countries, but many parallels. Thank you both again, and we look forward to seeing this online. Bye-bye now.